After their parents passed, the family gathered in that cold, unforgiving law office. Elaine thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the one time she wouldn't feel like the outsider. But when the will was read, reality cut sharper than winter wind. William and Charlotte were handed a fortune. The Manhattan penthouse, the vineyard in Napa, endless stocks and bonds. Elaine, she was left with a forgotten skeleton of a house, a rotting mansion buried in Vermont. The memory of laughter in that office still echoed in her head, mocking, cruel. As she closed her hand around the rusted iron keys, the lawyer slid across the table. They thought it was a joke. They thought they'd humiliated her. But inside those crumbling walls, Elaine would find something that would change everything, because hidden beneath dust and decay was a secret even her parents hadn't known. Something worth more than every dollar her siblings had stolen from her. Years later, when William and Charlotte's wealth had slipped through their fingers, it was Elaine they came crawling back to. By then, the mansion had been restored, her life transformed, and for the first time the power was hers. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, if this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us share more stories that grip your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. And trust me, you'll want to stick around until the very end of this one. The air inside Whitmore and Langston Law felt colder than the February wind outside. Not the kind of cold that chills your skin, the kind that seeps into your bones, reminding you that you don't belong. Elaine Monroe sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table in a high-backed leather chair. She didn't lean back, she didn't cross her legs. Her hands stayed folded neatly in her lap, as if she were still that quiet little girl, always told to sit still and be grateful. Across from her, William and Charlotte whispered, not about their parents, not about grief. They whispered about stocks, about art, about which painting from the New York penthouse would look better in which apartment. Their voices were sharp, rehearsed, already slicing up a life their parents hadn't even been gone long enough to mourn. Others sat around the edges of the room, family friends, a distant aunt, the old financial advisor. Their whispers drifted across the polished wood like smoke. She's here for the charity cut, one voice said, just loud enough for Elaine to hear. Another chuckled back, always the outsider. Elaine kept her eyes fixed on the table, her breathing slow. If she looked up now, they'd see the hurt, and in this family, showing hurt was the same as surrendering power. The lawyer cleared his throat. The soft rustle of papers filled the silence. As per the wishes of the late Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, he began, voice flat, stripped of any warmth. William Monroe is bequeathed the penthouse in Manhattan. Charlotte Monroe, the vineyard in Napa Valley. The remaining liquid assets, cash, bonds, stocks, are to be split evenly between the two. A pause. Every eye in the room shifted toward Elaine, to Elaine Monroe, the family estate in Vermont. The estate. That was a generous word. Elaine knew what it really was. A decaying husk of a house her parents had abandoned when it became too costly to keep. A roof sagging under storms, windows shattered, gardens drowned in weeds. The last time she'd seen it, the grand double doors were chained shut with rust. William smirked. "Guess you won't be homeless after all," he muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. Quiet laughter rippled. Charlotte smirked too. "Maybe you could open it as a haunted house. At least then it would be useful." A few of the onlookers snickered, one murmuring, "Better than nothing, I suppose." Elaine sat perfectly still, letting their cruelty sting without showing it. When the lawyer slid the old iron keys across the table, she reached forward and took them, cold, heavy, the kind of keys that belonged to a place long forgotten. She said nothing, offered no thanks. She simply slipped them into her bag, stood, and walked toward the door. The whispers swelled behind her, but not one person called her name. Outside, the winter air stung her cheeks. The city moved on. Cars rushing by, lights flickering as if nothing monumental had just happened. She pulled her coat tight and headed toward the train station. She didn't return to her tiny rented apartment in Queens. Not that night. Elaine didn't go back to Queens. Instead, she bought a one-way ticket north, far past the cities, past the suburbs, past the places where the Monroe name still carried weight. By the time the train slowed into a lonely Vermont station, heavy snow had begun to fall. Not the gentle kind that drifts like feathers, but the wet, bone-deep kind that soaks through your gloves and makes every road dangerous. A rusted pickup idled outside the station, its driver leaning against the hood. He gave her that small-town look of polite curiosity reserved for strangers who clearly don't belong. Without much talk, he drove her into the woods. The road wound deeper and deeper, narrowing as the trees pressed in. Pavement gave way to gravel, gravel to dirt, and by the time the sky dimmed toward late afternoon, the mansion appeared. It loomed at the end of the drive like a ghost. What had once been white walls were now streaked black by years of storms. Windows yawned empty, some covered with warped boards, others left open to the cold. The gardens, once the Monroe pride, had twisted into thorny tangles and dead husks. The driver whistled low. Been a long time since anyone cared for this place. Elaine didn't answer. She stepped out into the bitter air, boots crunching, over gravel and ice, and just stood there. In the silence, she swore she could hear her siblings' laughter echoing still. Pulling her scarf tighter, she climbed the cracked stone steps. The iron key groaned as it turned, and the heavy doors creaked inward inch by inch, like lungs remembering how to breathe. Dust hung thick in the air, shifting slowly in a pale shaft of winter light. Elaine lingered at the threshold, fingers tight around the key, like a charm against bad luck. The grand foyer revealed itself piece by piece, two curling staircases, a chandelier the size of a small car dangling from a single chain, its crystals dulled and furry with grime. A draught prowled around her ankles like a cat, and somewhere deeper inside the house a shutter tapped, tap, tap, patient and relentless. She took her first step inside, then another. The sound of her boots whispered across grit, stirring up little ghosts of dust. Her hand trailed the banister, sticky, splintered, and she wiped it off with a faint, bitter smile. "Welcome home, huh?" she muttered under her breath. Room by room she explored. The dining hall was draped in cobwebs like funeral veils. The conservatory's glass ceiling had caved, leaving only the skeletons of vines that had climbed in and died. In the kitchen, a pot still sat on the stove, frozen in time, its grease hardened into amber. Elaine cracked a window and coughed as stale air escaped. She forced another window open until a reluctant stream of cold, fresh air crept inside. She chose a small room behind the kitchen to claim. 4 walls, 1 half-working window. It would have to do. She rolled out a thin mattress, shook off a blanket, and set her bag down like she was planting a flag. The little heater she'd carried hummed weakly, losing its battle with the icy room, but she still held her hands over it, turning them slowly, savoring the tiny victory. Work came in rituals. A broom, a bucket, a foldable lamp clipped to a doorframe. Sweep, gather, dump, sweep, again. Hours blurred into rhythm, her shoulders aching but relentless. When the bucket filled, she carried it to the back steps and dumped the dark slurry into the frozen earth. Steam curled into the air, fading like thoughts she refused to entertain. 2 days later, she walked into the village hardware store. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, but conversations paused mid-sentence. Not hostile, just curious. The kind of curiosity wrapped in wool and flannel. She didn't linger. She picked what she needed. Tarps, a respirator, gloves, a pry bar, a headlamp. She moved down the aisles with quiet efficiency. Every choice weighed against the cash, folded in her pocket. At the register, the clerk raised his brows, waiting for the story behind the stranger. The clerk scanned her items, pausing just long enough to study her face. "You the one up at the old Monroe place?" "Yeah," Elaine answered simply, her voice even. "Roof's mean." He nodded knowingly, sliding the last box across. "Basement floods when the thaw hits. Just saying." "I'll take a wet." "Vac too," she replied, stacking her supplies with neat, deliberate hands. By the paint aisle, two women compared swatches, their whispers meant to hide curiosity but failing. "Is she really staying there alone?" one asked. "Looks like it," the other muttered. "That place chews people up." On the sidewalk outside, a pair of teens shuffled by in puffy jackets. One pointed, loud enough for her to hear. "Yo, that's the city lady. Why bother fixing a haunted museum?" The other, softer, almost sympathetic, replied, "Still, kind of brave." Elaine kept walking, no anger, no pride, just that steady, practical hum in her chest. Do this, then that, then rest. Back at the mansion, she turned her focus to the library. Even in ruin, it had presence. Towering shelves stretched floor to ceiling. A rolling ladder stood frozen mid-climb, as if someone had stepped away years ago and never returned. Leather. Spines cracked like old knuckles when she touched them. She pushed open a tall casement window an inch, letting the winter air bite the stale room clean. Paper. Varnish, a faint ghost of pipe smoke, stubborn in the wood after decades. She sorted, in silence. Keep, donate, trash. The keep pile grew slow, deliberate, each choice weighed like a heartbeat. Her breath fogged in the beam of her headlamp until she switched hands, flexing her wrists in tiny resets, the quiet craft of enduring hard things. Evenings were for repairs she could do without ladders. She scraped paint from the small room, curls falling around her boots like white snow. She patched holes, sanded, then laid her palm flat against the wall. Not pleased, not proud, just aligned. Dinner was soup, heated on a camp stove, with bread and an apple. She ate perched on a crate, listening to the house breathe its old animal noises, tap, settle, sigh. On the third morning, the plumber came. His boots thudded down the hallway like a steady drumbeat. He crouched in the basement, muttering as if the pipes were a riddle only he could half solve. "These pipes," he said, tracing their lines with a gloved hand, "they're a history lesson." He talked shop. Elaine listened, asked for lists, dates, costs. When he left, she stood at the basement door alone, staring down at the blackness. Cold climbed from below, like a thought she wasn't ready to face. She exhaled slowly and turned away. Not today. Midweek, a bitter wind howled through the hills, and the mansion groaned in reply. Elaine wrapped her scarf tighter and moved through the upstairs hallways, checking for leaks, laying towels under dripping sills. She named the rooms aloud as if naming them tamed them. East bedroom, corner suite, nursery with the faded blue border. Names shrank the scale of the work. Names made it hers. Late that afternoon, when the winter light grew thin and edges blurred into shadow, she returned to the library. She dragged the rolling ladder across the grit of the floor and climbed. Carefully to the third shelf. Her gloved fingers closed around a heavy atlas. It resisted, then released with a weary sigh of paper. Behind it, the backboard didn't sit quite right. Just slightly off, a seam so thin it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for it. She frowned and tapped the wood. Once, twice. Not the dull thud of solid backing, but something faintly hollow, like a drum stretched too tight. Her attention sharpened. She traced the grain and noticed it didn't match the surrounding planks. A seam ran vertically, hair-thin, not dramatic, not shocking, just enough to shift the air in the room. Carefully, she descended the ladder, knees steady, breath even. On the floor, she set the atlas in the keep pile, then crouched low and rolled the ladder flush against the shelf to anchor her reach. Pulling off a glove, she pressed her fingertips to the seam, running them slowly from waist height to shoulder. The change in temperature was subtle, but there, cooler here, warmer there, like a tongue discovering a chipped tooth. She spread her, fingers wide, testing each edge. Nothing gave. She tried the baseboard. Nothing. She pressed against the upper corner. This time the panel whispered against her touch, just slightly, a whisper of movement, so faint she felt it more than saw it. Elaine froze, hand pressed against the seam, scanning the wood for any catch or hidden mechanism. Old houses had their own language. They spoke not just through sound, but through skin, through patience. She rolled her shoulders back, took a slow breath that filled the bottom of her lungs. Not now, she thought. Not tired, not rushing. She pulled a pencil from her pocket and marked the seam with a small dot before stepping away, letting the question linger in the room like a held note. By twilight, snow began again. Not heavy, soft, dry flakes that hissed against the window screens. She laid her tools in a neat line on a towel: gloves, scraper, flashlight, a flathead screwdriver that could serve as a probe. With a click, she turned off the clamp light. The library dimmed, bookshelves fading into hulking silhouettes stacked like dark loaves. As she walked the perimeter once more, a draft teased past her palm at the far corner, slipping out from behind the bookcase. The cold ribbon of air was faint, but undeniable. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Okay," she murmured. The next morning, she returned to the hardware store. The bell chimed, the clerk looked up, and recognition flickered across his face. "You're making a project of it," he said, while bagging her new tools one by one. Elaine tucked a stray braid behind her ear, the gesture small, but exact. "What are the odds the walls are hiding surprises?" He shrugged, tone friendly, but evasive. "Old places keep stories. Sometimes they keep squirrels." Outside, the two women from the day before were back, coffee cups steaming in their hands. Their words floated on the white breath of morning. "She looks tired," one remarked. "She looks focused," the other replied, as though the two were not contradictions. Back at the mansion, Elaine ate, standing at the counter, a sandwich, a handful of almonds, and sketched the shelf on a notepad. Measurements, location, notes about the hollow sound. She wasn't chasing adrenaline, she was drawing a map. She set the stud finder against the panel. The device hummed faintly, lights skipping in odd patterns that didn't match the surrounding. Boards. She tilted her head, sliding it horizontally, then vertically, then on a diagonal, like listening to a familiar song suddenly played in a different key. She jotted notes, then tested the gap with her flathead featherlight pressure, just enough to feel resistance. She stopped, pulled back. Not today. But this time, the words didn't feel like avoidance. They felt like timing. She reshelved the atlas, shifted a row of novels to spread the weight, and heard the shelves settle with a subtle, satisfied creak. Evening drew her outside. Breath puffed white as she salted the steps. Above, the sky cleared to a hard blue-black, stars sharp enough to cut skin. She leaned against the railing, surveying the grounds. She pictured paths she would clear, gardens she would replant, lights she'd string along the long driveway. Not fantasy, plans. A canvas stretched over months of work. From the road, faint voices carried, two walkers, a dog's collar clinking. "About time," one said. "Took somebody stubborn," the other answered. Elaine pushed off the rail and closed the front door behind her with a firmness that sounded like a promise. Inside, the house exhaled. She set her alarm early. Tomorrow would be for the library, not for some reckless reveal, but for careful hands and quiet persistence, listening to what the wood was ready to say. Morning came wrapped in silver fog, blurring the line between sky and earth. Elaine woke before her alarm, steady, as though the day had been waiting for her. She layered up, pulled on fingerless gloves so she could feel the textures without going numb, and walked straight to the library. The air there was cleaner now, days of open windows and constant sweeping giving it a faint crispness. She positioned the lamp low, letting the shadows reveal what light concealed. The rolling ladder rattled as she pushed it back to the marked seam. Her tools lay lined on a drop cloth, each within reach. She crouched, slipped the flathead gently into the narrow gap at the base, and pressed softly, like testing the teeth of a key in a lock she'd never opened before. A whisper of wood fibers gave way. Elaine shifted the tool higher, pressing. Where the stud finder had revealed emptiness, this time the panel moved with a soft, reluctant sigh. Only an inch, but enough. She froze. Breath in, breath out. No sudden pull, no reckless rush. She pressed her palm against the board and eased it sideways. It groaned like something untouched for decades, stubborn, but yielding until at last darkness appeared at the edge. Behind the shelf stretched a hollow space, tall enough for her to step inside. The smell reached her first, not rot, not mold, but a dry metallic tang, like coins left too long in a drawer. She flicked on her headlamp and ducked through. Her boots met cold stone. The narrow corridor ended at a steel door, heavy, old, the kind with a dial lock you'd expect in a bank. Elaine touched the handle. It was solid, tarnished, and so heavy it pulled her hand downward. She let go, the chill lingering in her skin. No code, but patience, that she had. She snapped photos of the lock, the hinges, the weld lines. Then she called someone not listed in any phone book, a locksmith who answered the phone with, "Who gave you my number?" He arrived the next afternoon in a dented van, tools hidden, under a blanket. He didn't ask questions, just studied the vault with the quiet reverence of a craftsman. "This," he murmured, running a hand along the steel, "is older than both of us put together." 4 hours passed. Breaks for coffee, stretches to warm his hands. Elaine sat cross-legged near the library door, watching dust float in the lamplight. The faint clicks of tumblers mixed with his occasional hums of approval. Then, at last, the final pins fell into place. No dramatic swing, no echoing crash, just a low creak as the door inched open. Cold air drifted out, carrying with it the faint perfume of old paper and something sharper. Polish or maybe cedar. Inside, shelves lined. The walls stacked with shapes wrapped in canvas and bundles sealed in wax paper. Elaine reached for the nearest bundle. She peeled it back and froze. Stacks of cash, crisp and unweathered despite their age. Another shelf groaned under the weight of gold bars, stamped with dates from the late 70s, heavy enough to make her wrist tremble. Neat rows of bearer bonds waited beside them, their values so large her eyes blurred. In the corner sat a wooden crate. She pried it open. Light scattered across raw gemstones, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, each one cold, solid and alive in her palm. But Elaine didn't gasp, didn't dance, didn't imagine headlines. This wasn't a jackpot. This was gravity shifting beneath her feet. Every step inside the vault felt heavier, more deliberate. She was not the same woman who had stood in that law office weeks before, mocked with rusted keys while her siblings smirked. Over the next days, she inventoried everything. Each night, she locked the vault, slipping the key into a hiding place. Only she knew. She worked quietly at her makeshift desk, running calculations, researching investments, learning how to move wealth like shadows, silently, without noise. Soon, repairs accelerated. Orders at the hardware store grew larger, and whispers followed her. "She's going big," the clerk told another customer. "She's not wasting time." The man nodded. "That's for sure." By summer, scaffolding wrapped the mansion. Fresh paint replaced decades of decay. The garden stirred back to life, rows of flowers bending toward sunlight, gravel paths stretched clean and defined. Workers came and went, speaking in low tones about their employer. "Quiet boss," they said, "but she pays on time, knows what she wants. No cutting corners." The library glowed once again, its shelves polished, its chandelier restored to amber light. And behind the bookcase, the vault remained, locked untouched, except for what she needed to fuel her vision. Elaine didn't sell. She didn't run to the city with her fortune. She stayed, brick by brick, wall by wall, until the mansion stood. Reborn, graceful, commanding, impossible to ignore at the end of the long drive. The first call came from Charlotte, her voice thin, urgent. "Elaine, we need to talk. It's important." The second from William, rougher. "Call me. It's serious." But the woman they were calling now was not the same one they had once dismissed. She wasn't the sibling left with scraps. She held the key, both to the vault and to the seat at the table they'd never let her near. The reunion wasn't planned. It came on a raw November afternoon, the kind where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or snow. Elaine had just stepped out of her study when she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. Not a delivery van. Something slower, heavier. She pulled the curtain back just enough. A black sedan idled beneath the bare oak trees. William stepped out first, his once-tailored coat hanging loose, a shadow of its former glory. Charlotte followed, wrapped in muted beige, trying for elegance but betrayed by the frayed cuffs of her sleeves. They stood there a long moment, as if the house itself unsettled them. When Elaine opened the door, the November wind cut sharp through the gap, carrying the damp scent of wet leaves. "Elaine," Charlotte said softly. Not weak, just stripped of all the sharp edges. "Can we come in?" She didn't speak, just stepped aside. They walked into a foyer transformed, polished wood floors gleaming, banisters shining, the chandelier restored to its golden blaze. This was no ruin anymore. This was power, rebuilt. At the dining table they sat, hands clasped. No smirks, no laughter. William cleared his throat first. "Things haven't been good." Charlotte's voice cracked as she added, "The vineyard's gone, the penthouse sold, debts, real ones. We didn't know where else to turn." Elaine poured tea into 3 cups. The kettle's hum filled the silence. She slid theirs across the table, then sat down herself. But she didn't rush to soothe. She let the silence press in, heavy, suffocating, let them feel what it was like to wait. Finally, she spoke. Calm, controlled. "When you gave me this house, you thought it was worthless. I turned it into something beyond your imagination, and I did it without taking a cent from either of you." Neither sibling looked up. "And now, you're here because you need me." Charlotte's voice trembled. "We'll do whatever it takes." Elaine lifted her cup, her gaze steady over the rim. "You will. You'll repay every cent. You'll work not for me, but for something greater. The foundation I've built in our parents' name is growing. You'll help run it, and you'll answer to me." William bristled, old pride twitching in his jaw. But he didn't argue. Couldn't. "It's not punishment," Elaine continued. "It's perspective. The same lesson I learned when you left me with nothing." The winter light shifted, laying long shadows across the table. Charlotte nodded. First, William followed, shoulders sagging, as though he'd finally set down a weight he could no longer carry. When their sedan pulled away, its engine fading down the long drive, Elaine stood at the library door. Her eyes lingered on the shelves, and on the hidden vault beyond them, the heartbeat of everything that had brought her to this moment. Word spread fast in the village. At the bakery, 2 locals whispered over their loaves. "They're working for her now." "Sure looks that way. Life's funny, isn't it?" By spring, the three siblings appeared together again, at charity galas, ribbon cuttings, fundraisers, but everyone knew whose name carried the weight, whose vision commanded the room. And Elaine? She didn't need revenge and flames. The mansion itself stood tall as proof that sometimes the greatest triumph isn't watching your enemies fall, but making them rise again, under your roof, by your rules. So tell me, if you were in Elaine's place, would you forgive or make them pay? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story will leave you speechless.